to our guests who are tuning into us all the way from France. So thank you everybody for tuning in here in the United States at kind of an odd time. We don't always host programs this early in the day, but I want to thank you so much for making that adjustment. We are very excited to host a very good friend of our museum, Christophe Gosselin and Charles Norman Shay, and we will get to them in just a minute. Because I do want to remind everybody one last time that we are using closed captions for this presentation. They are about 80% accurate, and we'll have a hard time with some of the town names, especially names of towns today. So if you'd like to turn those off, you can go ahead and follow the instructions on the screen. But I also want to give everybody a heads up on some upcoming events here at the 1st Division Museum. So let's go ahead and get those up for you. First and foremost, I want to remind everybody on Wednesday, June 3rd, if you're in the Chicagoland area, that the 1st Division Museum will be hosting the 1st Infantry Division Band in our tank park. They're going to be playing classic rock and country music. That'll be a fun day that starts at 6 p.m. You do not need to register for that program, despite what this screen says. You can just go ahead and come on by. Also, I want to mention that coming up in July, on July 17th and 18th, is the National Gathering of American Indian Veterans here at Cantini Park, and brought to us by the Trickster Cultural Center. So you can find out more about that by visiting their website. But while I'm bringing up the Trickster Cultural Center, I want to also bring up Charles's documentary, which I highly suggest, which is called D-Day Warriors. It was our war too. And that documentary is for purchase at tricksterculturalcenter.org. So feel free to head on over there. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because I'd like to welcome all of our presenters today. First and foremost, I want to welcome Christophe Gosselin, who owns Normandy Heritage Tours and has 11 years experience as a private tour guide on D-Day landings and the Battle of Normandy. And I know that Christophe and we were talking, and it has been about 18 months since you've been able to give a proper Normandy tour. So I know he is just ready to talk to us about that. And I also want to welcome our very special guest of honor, Charles Norman Shay. On June 6, 1944, Charles was a 19-year-old platoon medic attached with Fox Company, 2nd Battalion of the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division. He landed on Omaha Beach, and it was his very first day in combat, but certainly not his last. So we hope to talk a little more about that today as well. Charles is a Penobscot tribal elder and decorated veteran of both World War II and the Korean War. Additionally, Charles served in the United States Air Force in a weather squadron and took part in Operation Castle during the Cold War in the Marshall Islands. So before we go over to Charles, I want to remind everybody that we are going to do our best with sound today. Charles may need some questions repeated to him. So please provide us a little bit of grace as we get Charles set up to answer all of the questions today. So we thank you for that. But first and foremost, I would like to send it over to my friend Christophe, who is going to set us up with some big picture ideas of D-Day. So Christophe, with that, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for making this presentation at this time. You know, at midnight, Charles and I would be probably in different states. Anyway, that's important for me to do that. As you said earlier, I'm a private tour guide, but also history aficionado like many of you probably. So I'd like to maybe subsume a little bit, go a bit too fast probably, explaining the war a little bit of the 1st Division, Charles, and Normandy especially, because Normandy is the beginning of the end of the Third Reich, the Third German Empire. So that's important to explain that Normandy is only the beginning of the fighting in Europe, but that's the opening of the Western Front. Before that, you had different tests, I would say, of the German defenses with 2 different strategies. The first strategy was to invade Normandy, northern France, opening the front as close as possible from Calais and northern France, because the strait between England and Calais is shorter, about 22 miles. And that's why I'd like to show you a map very quickly, a map of France like this here. And we are in this area. So it's further from England. There is about 100 miles from Normandy to England. That's the idea. So the first test was on August 19th, 1942. It's mainly a British raid on Dieppe, D-I-E-P-P-E, Dieppe. I guess I can confirm it's not very good at town's name. And that's a confirmation only. And you know, that's important. It was mostly British, as I said, but it's also the first American fatality of World War II, because there were a group of American Rangers trained with the British in Achnacarry, Scotland, so with the Royal Marine Commandos, and that landed with the British forces and mostly Canadian forces, in fact. So it's British Commonwealth Empire, sometimes referred as Imperials in American books. That's always very funny to speak about the Commonwealth that way anyway. So Dieppe is in Upper Normandy. We are in Lower Normandy, so in West Normandy today. So that's 1944. 1942, 1944. In between, the 1st Division was deeply concerned and engaged in the fighting in North Africa, Sicily, and southern Italy. That's important to understand. That is a different strategy, that to attack the weakest ally of Germany, what Churchill defined as the soft underbelly of Europe. And the opening of the Western Front, the way that Normandy happened, was more Stalin's idea to lower the pressure on the Eastern Front and force the Germans to move troops from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. The 1st Division was very good at it in the south, and then was moved from the southern European theater of operation to England, and then Charles, in other words, was a replacement because they suffered heavy casualties in those landings, but they had some experiences of what happened. Maybe we'll speak later about Ray Lambert, who was Charles' sergeant for that occasion. Now, Normandy, I'd like to show you a map of Normandy a little bit. It's hard, I know, with all of this here, but you have the landing area, which is here. My map is in French, but the landing area is over there. It's about 50 miles of coastline where they landed on D-Day, 5 landing beaches, code name, and they're only code names: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. The funny story, they are code names from code lists. So Utah and Omaha are American code names because, you know, Utah, the state of Utah, and Omaha City. So they come from an American code list. And Gold, Juno, Sword are from a British code list. In fact, normally, Juno wasn't Juno at first in the first plan anyway. But Gold and Sword, in fact, it's Goldfish and Swordfish. So because they had a list of fishes. And that's why they codenamed that way here. So from west to east, it's Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, finally. Both flanks were covered by paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, who are very famous now because of, you know, movies, series, especially Band of Brothers. And on the other side, in the eastern side, the 6th British Airborne Division. So that's the context of all of this. Now, speaking of Omaha Beach, which is probably the most famous, and for bad reasons, I would say, because it is where the Allied forces had the heaviest casualty rate, the higher casualty rate. And you have to know that there were more British Commonwealth soldiers who landed on D-Day than Americans on the beaches. But there are more American paratroopers than British paratroopers on D-Day. So global number is 156,000 troops landed on D-Day, the first day only of a long battle, because it's an almost 3-month battle, the Battle of Normandy, the battle for Normandy, as Anthony Beaver said. And then the objective was to capture a large portion of Western France and Paris, and then move toward Germany to reconquer Europe. So that is the beginning of the liberation of Europe to us. About Omaha Beach, just one second here, and I'd like to show you this map with many, many arrows through it, because maybe you can see that there is a plan on top. So it's how the landing was planned with different sections of the beach. So code name, Charlie, Dog, Easy, and Fox sectors of Omaha. In fact, the code name starts in the west of Omaha Beach with Abel and Baker. Then Abel, Baker, Charlie, Dog, Easy, Fox, you can easily understand that that was the codes of the time. Now, Easy is not anymore Easy, it's Echo. But, you know, that is the kind of change which are very interesting because, you know, when you had slaughters on sectors called Easy, Easy wasn't easy, you know, and especially Easy red, so right and left, green and red. So green is right, red is left. And you know, when you had a slaughter on Easy red, like it happened on D-Day in front of different, what we called Widerstehennest, taking the German nomenclature for that here. So WN, sometimes you can read maps and books and they speak about WN, that's Widerstehennest. So that's a nest of different bunkers together, a defense, in fact. Cross-firing with, so interlocking, cross-firing with another bunker and other weapons to make a deadly fire somewhere. So that's what happened when Charles landed in front of WN 62 precisely, between 62 and 61 to be more precise. 62 is on my map, as you can see, sorry, over here. And that's pretty much where Charles landed in this area. So he landed with the 16th Infantry Regiment because it was the first division and the 29th Division involved. So with Baumgartner's, for example, he's the most famous. The account of Baumgartner is probably the best about the 29th Division. And the author you should read, sorry, is Joe Balkowski. And for the first division, I love the book of John McManus. I know he's a great friend of the museum, and I just love him. I mean, it's just a great storyteller. Thank you. I think it's enough for a beginning, don't you think, Laura?
Yes, I think that was an excellent setup. So I cannot thank you enough, Christophe, for so perfectly setting us up to where Charles is on the beach. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our friend Charles. Christophe and I are going to be engaging in conversation with Charles and asking him some questions about his service. So we're going to go ahead and get started with some big picture questions. And I'm going to pull up my screen while Charles is answering our first question, which is, Charles, are you ready?
Yes, yes.
Excellent.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Same on D-Day. He said, I hope so.
I hope so. All right, Charles, could you tell us a little bit about when and where you joined the service?
Well, that's a story also in itself because I came from the state of Maine, and my parents, I had to register in the state of Maine for the draft at Bangor, Maine, but during that time, my parents had moved to Boston, Massachusetts, and gained employment at the Charleston Navy Yard, worked on Navy ships, and my father was in construction, and my mother found work as a secretary in one of the offices there. So after I graduated high school, I went to a training school that was implemented by the government. I think they called it, well, I don't remember the name now. Anyway, it was a training school that was implemented by the government to train young people, young men, for jobs in the industry. And I went to a machinist training school, and I graduated. It was only a few months, I think about 4 or 5 months. I graduated the school, and because my parents had moved to Boston, when I went back home where I grew up, it was empty. So I moved to Boston and joined my folks there. And I had to then change my my point of enlistment from Bangor, Maine to Boston, Massachusetts. And I think in April of 1943, I was called up for service by the office that I had transferred to, and I joined the U.S. I was placed in the U.S. Army. It was not my choice. I was sent to Fort Devens. This was where we were introduced into the Army, and from there I had to go to Camp Pickett, which is in Virginia, for my training and introduction into the United States Army. This was approximately, I think our training at that particular time was about 8 or 10 weeks long. And once we had completed that, this was only an introduction to the Army to teach us what it was all about and so forth. And once that was over, we were more or less lined up, and a man went down the line, an Army officer, and said, "You're going to be a truck driver, you're going to be a medic, you're going to be this, you're going to be that." And that's where I was selected to be a medical technician. I had no say about it. I was sent from Camp Pickett to Virginia. I was sent to a medical training school at the hospital at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indianapolis, Indiana, for about 8 weeks of training as a medical technician. And while I was there, I worked in the operating room as a circulating nurse. And I thought, well, this is going to be a good deal for me. And when I get out of here, I'll be working in the hospital without any, will not have to worry about it anymore. But this was not true. Once I completed my training at Fort Benjamin Harrison, I was given leave to go home, say goodbye to my parents. And I was told that once I had my leave was up, I was to report to New York for transportation across the ocean on the Queen Elizabeth. My mother accompanied me to New York to say goodbye to me. And I went to New York with my mother. We stayed together a day or 2 or 3 days. I don't recall how long exactly. And we boarded the Queen Elizabeth. And because this ship was very fast going across the ocean, it did not need any escort to protect it. It was very fast, and German submarines could not target it. And the Queen Elizabeth did not need any assistance from protection from the U.S. Navy. I landed in a port in England, I think about 6 days later, and I debarked the Queen Elizabeth, and I went into a training, a replacement depot, and I was in the replacement depot for about 2 or 3 days, and then I was told that I would be joining the 16th Infantry Regiment Medical Battalion, which was stationed at Bridport, England. This is in southern England on the coast, on the coast of the Channel. I went to Bridport, reported to my unit, and I was placed in the medical detachment of the 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment. There I I joined the 16th Infantry Regiment, and this is where I met Ray Lambert, who was in charge of the medical aid station of that particular time, and his job was to train us as combat medics and to inform us what it would be like and what we could expect. He had been through North Africa and Sicily. And he was an experienced, he had been wounded a couple of times, and he was an experienced man, and the proper man to introduce other men into the medical service. We had a battalion aid station in the 16th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion, and I was assigned as a combat medic to F Company. So therefore, I did not stay in the medical aid station. I had to move on further to F Company, and I joined them as a medical aid man. Our training as a infantry regiment was very sincere, very stiff and very sincere at that particular time. We had a training area where I think it was called Slepton Sands, which was in England, in which was very similar to the beaches of Omaha. And this is where we trained on loading ships, debarking from ships, and how to and making invasions of the beaches on Slepton Sands. Also, this Slepton Sands was while I was there one training, the Germans were able to break the protection of Slepton Sands. This protection was very stiff and very complete, but the Germans were able to get through with speed boats, patrol boats. I don't know what they called them at that particular time, but anyway, they were armed watercraft, very fast, and they sank very many ships that were loaded with GIs that were traded for the beaches of Omaha. I think that at that particular time, over 700 men drowned. And we were told not to talk about that or write about it because it was top secret. They did not want to upset the people back in America because some of them had lost their sons in this incident, and they were not even at war. They were training for war. So it was never mentioned. I don't think it was even mentioned until well after the war was over. Anyway, I completed my training, and then we received orders to debark for loading on troop transport ships that would carry us across the channel. We were supposed to have gone across the channel and invaded the beaches on the 5th of September, but because of the bad weather, Eisenhower was very worried about the weather and was forced to postpone the loading of the troop transport ships and the sailing across the channel for 24 hours. And because he was afraid that the information might get to the Germans that what happened, that we were already loaded on ships and ready to sail across the channel, he made the decision that after 24 hours, he talked to these people and his weathermen and so forth, and he decided to proceed with the invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June. We sailed across the channel, and of course, like we always did when we were sailing on ships to pass time, we had free time to pass. We were always playing dice or playing cards or whatever, and not worrying about what was about to take place ahead of us. I was very lucky. I made a few dollars, and but it did not do me any good. Anyway, we got, we made it across the channel, and we got to our anchor point, which was a few miles off the coast of Normandy. And we were told that we should debark very early in the morning. So after we reached our point on the coast off the coast of Normandy, about 3 o'clock in the morning, the announcement came over the intercom system to report to the deck and prepare to load into landing craft that would carry us into the beaches. We were supposed to travel to the beach in groups of 6. So therefore, we went up on deck. The sea was still very rough. The crew, the ship crew threw rope nets over the sides of the ship, which we had to crawl down on. And once we got in the neighborhood of the landing craft, we were told to jump. We had to be very careful because the seas were 5 and 6 up to 7 feet high. That meant that the landing craft were going anywhere from 5 to 7 feet up and down on the side of the ship. So we had to plan our jump into the landing craft from the nets. And of course, some of the men that had already made it assisted us and told us when we were ready to leave the net when to jump. If we missed the landing craft and landed, we could land in between the landing craft and the ship and be crushed to death in the sea. Or if you jumped when the landing craft was too low, you could break a leg or be injured very seriously. But fortunately, the men that had made it into the landing craft told us when to leave the nets, and I did not have any or experience any injuries when I loaded the landing craft that I was assigned to. Once we were loaded, we were told to leave the ship, and we had an assembly area where we would assemble 6 landing craft in a group. And of course, this took a few minutes, half an hour approximately, something like this. And once we had our 6 landing craft of the group, once we were all in the circle, some distance from the ship that we crossed the channel on, we were given the order to proceed to the beach. We left the landing area, and at this time, the firepower of the Germans and the American ships that were stationed in the channel was very serious. The Americans were firing large caliber ship guns, and the Germans, of course, were doing the same thing, small and large caliber, were firing at the ships, and the American ships were firing at the shores at the Germans. This went on for some time, all the time that we were motoring from our assembly point to the beaches. And on the beaches, the Germans had established underwater barriers that was to prevent just such landing craft as we were on from getting too close to the beach. And this is what happened to us. We became marooned on another underwater obstacle, and the coxswain, this is the Navy man that was in charge of the landing craft, told us, prepare to debark because I'm dropping the ramp. I am marooned on the underwater obstacle and I cannot move. So he dropped the ramp. Of course, the men that were standing in front of the landing craft were, once the ramp went down, were unprotected. And many of them did not even get off the landing craft. Some of them were killed right there on the spot by machine gun fire, small mortars or small artillery hitting the boat, hitting the landing craft, and they were not even able to make it. Others were so heavily loaded down with equipment, ammunition, and so forth, and they were carrying mortars and larger caliber weapons, in addition to their weapons, to their rifles and machine guns. And some of them were so heavily loaded down, when they jumped into the water, they sank and they disappeared, and they never came back up. They drowned. When I left the ship, I was the last one to leave. These landing craft carried about 30 infantrymen and one medic. I was the last one to leave the landing craft, and when I jumped into the water, I landed in water up to my chest. But I was able to touch the bottom with my feet, and I made it immediately. I went in the direction of these underwater barriers, because some of them were underwater, but many of them were up above the water, because they were very large steel barriers. And I used these barriers for protection from small arms fire, mortar fire, and so forth. I used these barriers for protection. And of course, I was not the only one. All men were doing the same thing. I did not take time to treat anybody in the water, because I was concerned with my own life. I made it to the beach, and once I got onto the dry beach, or at least where the tide stopped, I made a dash for what I call the defilade. This was a barrier that had been built up at the top side of the beach from debris that has been washing up for perhaps thousands of years, or hundreds of years anyway. And this debris built up a wall that was made of sand and some shrubbery had grabbed roots in this barrier, sand barrier, and it was a pretty solid piece of protection that we could use. And once I got there, I started treating the troop, treating the men that had been wounded, and I worked there for a few minutes, and I happened to glance back to the water, and I saw that there were many wounded men laying on the beaches, laying on the water, in the water, where the water was rising, and they could not move because they had been wounded. And I thought, well, if nobody comes to their help, they're going to drown. They're doomed to drown. So I left what I was doing, and I returned to the water. Excuse me. I returned to the water, and I was talking about. Yeah, I returned to the water, and I tried to assist some of these men. I thought, well, there's no sense to treat them here, because I can't treat them or leave them. I have to see if I can get them up to the high tide area, where they will be safe when the tide rises to its highest point, that they would still be above the water line. So of course, many of these men, I was quite small, anyway, many of the men were larger than I was. So I rolled them over on their shoulders, on their backs, and I grabbed them under their arms and proceeded to drag them up to the high water mark, that I knew the water would come up that high, and that would be it. It would not go any higher. I did this for several minutes until I became exhausted, and I had to take a rest, and then I proceeded to do it a second time. And I didn't know where my strength came from, but another medic told me later on, after this had happened, that when you get in a situation like that, the adrenaline begins to flow in your body, and it gives you strength that you don't even know that you have. And that's why I was able to do this. But anyway, I became exhausted, and I had to drop. I just was too much for me. And I stayed on the beach and treated the wounded that I found. And while I was doing this, I found a medic that I had trained with by the name of Edward Morosevich. He came from New Jersey. I didn't know that at the time, but I learned it. I did not learn it until sometime in 2000. I found out I knew his name, but I didn't know where he came from. And I gave him a shot of morphine, and I could not bandage his wounds because he had an open stomach wound, and it was very large, and I knew that he was bleeding to death. There was nothing that I could do for him, and I think he knew this also. Anyway, while I was treating him, he died. He died while I was treating him, and of course, this affected me. Think in my brain and so forth, and well, there was nothing I could do for him. I had to leave him there. I left him because he died. He was dead. There was nothing I could do for him. Anyway, I stayed on the beaches. I had become separated from my unit. I did not see them anymore. I don't know what happened to them. They had proceeded inland without me, and there was much confusion on the beach, and this is why I lost them. And so about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, units of the 26th Infantry Regiment were starting to come onto the beach, and they were going inland because by that time, some of the resistance that was preventing us from going inland had been taken over and destroyed, and the men that followed us were able to proceed on to our objective, which was Colville-sur-Mer, which was a small village directly in our path. I landed in front of WN62. This was a WN62. WN means Widerstandsnest in German. And this is a protection point in English that was just exactly for that purpose, to keep the Americans from proceeding inland. And this WN62 was manned by a German that I later met sometime in 2000. He survived the war. He was responsible for killing perhaps 150 Americans, maybe more, with his machine gun, his mortars, and so forth. And of course, he was a hero in Germany. I was introduced to him in sometime in 2000. I think my first visit to Omaha Beach after the war was approximately 2007 or 2009, something like that. And I was introduced to Heinz Sevelo. Of course, I never shook his hand or acknowledged him because of what he did. And I know that he was also shooting at me when I returned to the water as I told you before, when I returned to the water to treat and rescue men that had been wounded and could not move. And I could see the bullets peppering the sand around my feet. But he never, for some reason, I don't know why, I was saved. And I attribute this to my mother's prayers because I was very religious. And I thought very much of my mother, and I knew that she was praying for me. And this man, this German man, he never hit me. I made it off the beach, and well, I was never wounded. Anyway, I had become separated from my unit, as I told you before, and about 4 o'clock in the evening, in the afternoon, I made my way off the beach, and I went up through WN 62, which was being blocked when I first got there by this German man operating his machine gun from this point. And by that time, he had been wiped out. And I proceeded past his point of defense and went up the draw that led to, what did I say the name of the village was?
Colville?
Colville-sur-Mer. I made it, and on my way, I was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had been up for over 24 hours because we sailed from from England across the channel. We debarked from the ship at 3 o'clock in the morning, and well, I was beat. I was really needed sleep. So when I was walking up this WN 62 exit, I could not go any further, and I fell asleep. I had to find a place to sleep, so I just laid down in the fields, and I went to sleep immediately. And I woke up very early in the morning. And when I woke up and I looked around to see where I was, I saw nothing but dead Germans and dead Americans. I had slept in a place where evidently a small battle had taken place before I arrived there, and I did not see these men when I went to sleep because it was dark. And when I woke up in the morning with a little bit of the early light of morning, I saw all of these dead people there. I had slept in amongst the dead. But anyway, I got up and I proceeded inland, and I finally found Colville-sur-Mer. And then I knew that this was our objective, and I found the medical aid station. They had already established and set up their tents and were treating the wounded at this point in the village. So I reported into the medical aid station, and I told them that I had been separated from my unit and that I was looking for Company F and if they could direct me. So they told me where I could find Company F because they knew where it was. And I proceeded and I found Company F and I rejoined my unit. Of course, we were no longer a effective combat unit because we had lost too many men, and we had to have replacement men immediately, and this is what they were waiting for. So it did not take very long. We received, and we were not the only unit. Many units had lost many men, and many units were waiting for replacements before they could proceed. We got our replacements, and from there we proceeded inland. And I did not remember much about these excursions that I made inland because there were so many small villages, and they all had French names, and I could not make any sense out of French. But I know that we eventually came to a large castle, and this is where we went into, I don't know, I want to say reserve again, but to take a rest and receive more replacements again. And while we were in this area, almost the whole battalion was there. And this is where I was, an officer came, was not generalized now, but another high officer, and decorated the men that had been recommended for decoration for their actions on the beach in the early morning hours. And I was one of them. I was presented with the Silver Star at this time for my action of rescuing men on the beach and perhaps saving their lives. And I guess that's about it that I can tell you. So if you want to ask another question, please, you may.
May I add something, Laura?
Go ahead, Christophe.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I found very interesting, and thank you, Charles, for doing this for us. I'm sure that the guests are very happy to hear an authentic account from Omaha, and so vivid, so interesting. I'd like to add a few things because it's not very well known. Slapton Sands in England is a tragedy that Charles mentioned earlier. It's not very well known because I think that fires have been declassified in early 2000. And I think that up to 2010, we had pretty much no idea of what happened there about the real count and so on. But it was already known in Normandy because there is a monument at Utah Beach, because most of the men who died there were from the 1st Engineer Special Brigade. And, it was, as Charles said, it was forbidden to speak about it. And there is an Admiral Moon, who committed suicide after the war. And some people says that he had too many secrets and it was too heavy burden for him. And there is Major, I'm not sure about the spelling or his name exactly, but it's Major Caffey, who insisted a year after D-Day to come back for the first June 6th. Sometimes my guest asks me, when did the Normans start to speak about D-Day and think it's important? The answer is from the first day. And the soldiers as well understood how important it was in their career and in their account of the war. So that's why the Major Caffey did a first monument, and the first monument dedicated by the local authorities with a young girl, lovely dressed and with flowers to give to the soldiers. That was June 6, 1945. So not even a month after the war, people knew something happened important there. Utah, Omaha, gold, Juno, and sword as well. The other thing I'd like to mention, the shingle embankment, it's natural protection. He mentioned the debris a little bit. Charles took cover behind something like a small wall made of little rocks. So we call it the shingle embankment because they are like small cobblestones, if you want, an aggregate of stones and sand together. That still exists today. But in fact, the Germans used the shingle embankment to make the bunkers up the hill. And that's why they took cover behind a little concrete block. So Ray Lambert was behind that as well. So it was the area where Charles landed. So when you go on Omaha Beach by WN62, as he said, on the beach, there is like a block of concrete that's made of shingles, so of rocks from the beach, by the Germans. Because it was a machine, a concrete crusher on top. It's not anymore like that. And we made a plaque dedicated to the 2nd Battalion of the 16th Regiment, 1st Division, a few years ago. And Charles and Ray were the only survivors who were there for the dedication of it, I wanted to say. And now the last thing I'd like to say is that about Edward Morosevich, Eddie is buried in the American Cemetery. And every year we go with Charles. I'm happy to say I'm sometimes his driver. And we go there and we put flowers on his grave. And that's important to say. Maybe one more last thing, if you I don't like to take too much of the time, but there is something we must mention, is that there is a Native American monument, the Shea Memorial, on the beach with a turtle and a bust of Charles. He is too shy, too modest to speak about it, so I'm going to do it for him. What I found first, because when we did the dedication together, I was his driver, and thanks to the 1st Division Museum, And it was so moving. All the day was very moving. And Charles was clearly, obviously, deeply affected and moved by this. And we stopped the car, and my car was a Peugeot, the French car maker, named TP, like a teepee, like an Indian teepee. And we stopped by a house, and on the way out, Charles recognized the name of the house, which was Neptune. And Charles could speak a bit more about this, but Neptune is also the name of the last man from the tribe he met on board the ship before he left. So we found it was a good sign to have this man, Neptune, and his grandson was in our delegation as well. So that is the story I remember myself about all of this, because now it's important to speak about all of that. Thank you, Laura.
Absolutely. Now, D-Day was Charles's first day in combat, but certainly not his last. As you heard in our introduction, Charles has a very long and honorable military career in front of him after D-Day. This is an image of Charles. He's right here in the bottom. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but he's right here on the bottom with the brassard on. And this, I believe, Charles, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is you in the Hurricane Forest?
This is liberation of Aachen.
This is at Aachen. Thank you.
By Aachen, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
The 26th Infantry,
16.
the 26th Infantry Division was assigned to take Aachen. And the 18th, 16th and 18th were to guard the flanks of Aachen, while the 26th was fighting the war in the city and cleaning it up, and of course killing the Germans that refused to surrender. And this, one of my friends that I grew up with from Indian Island was Melvin Neptune. And we got together after the war, and well, we discussed a little bit, but not very much about our experiences. And we did not talk very much about the war.
Well, Charles, we have about 15-20 minutes left, but I wanted to know if you wanted to share with any of our guests your service after World War II. Could you tell us a little bit about your service in Korea?
Yes. When I well, after the war in Europe, I was assigned to Vienna, Austria, and at this particular time, the city was occupied by the Americans, the Russians, the French, and
The British.
I think that was it. Yeah, Americans, Russians, French, and one other.
The British, Charles. The British.
British, yes. I forgot the British, yeah. And we used to have the changing of the guard every day, which was very interesting, especially when it was changing of the guard between the Russians and the Americans. Well, I always enjoyed it because it was, and I enjoyed Vienna. Vienna is a beautiful city. Eventually, I met a woman there that I married. She became my wife. And, but at that particular time, we could not choose when we wanted to get married. We were told if you wanted to get married, you had to register with the Army headquarters, and they say, okay, 2 months or 3 months before you leave Europe to go back to the United States, you can get married. And this is where it was. So we eventually got married, and I went back to the States, and I served in several different states, Florida, in Virginia, and so forth. And let me see, now I've lost my line of thought. Oh, yes.
And then you went to the Air Force.
No, I'm still.
Okay, you went to Korea, yeah.
Yeah.
Division,
And then after I got back to the States, did not take very long. I was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, which was at Fort Devens at that particular time. And of course, it did not take very long. I found out that we were destined for Korea eventually. So I had to tell my wife that I was leaving her, that she would, so I prepared a room in my parents' home. And for her, we decorated it, put fresh wallpaper on and so forth, and tried to make it comfortable for her. And well, eventually, I think in September of
1940,
I think,
50,
let's see,
50.
I went to
50.
Korea in 1960.
No, 50, 50 and 51.
50. Yeah, I think in sometime in 1950, I went back to the States, and this is where I joined the Third Infantry Division. I had to leave my wife there, as I said before, and I prepared a nice home room for her to stay in. And eventually, we were transferred from Fort Devens to San Francisco. We went by train across the country to San Francisco. There, we boarded a ship, and strangely enough, it was the same ship that I trashed the channel on when I made the invasion of Normandy. I think it was the Chase.
No, the Enrico.
The Enrico, yes. And when I got to China, we went into to Japan. We went up into the mountains for training, and eventually we were told to pack our bags and prepare to debark, that we would be going to to Korea. We boarded the ships, and as I said, it was the Enrico, the same ship that took me across the channel, took me across the Japanese Sea and we went to North Korea in a small village, a small port village called Wonsun. This was a small village that had been taken by the Americans and was used as a diversion point for action by the United States. It was protected, of course, by large enemy ships with their large guns, and the Chinese and the North Koreans could not retake it. It was left. It was a small American base. We got the orders that we were to go to the Wonsun Reservoir. This was a small reservoir that was in North Korea, very close to the Yalu River, where the Chinese had crossed the Yalu River, and they had engaged the 1st Infantry Division, and they had isolated them, the Chinese and the North Koreans, and they needed help to get out. So, and this was in October, November, and November was in North Korea is very, very, very cold. It was icy, and we had to march in from Monsoon. I don't know how many miles it was into the Chosun Reservoir, but it was quite a long way to go, and we could only go by walking. And of course, we lost a lot of men due to frostbite, because the men got wet feet. They could not change their socks properly, and a lot of them suffered with frostbite. Some of them lost their toes. They just froze and dropped off their feet, and we had many cases of frostbite. But eventually, we made it to the point where the Chinese and North Koreans had isolated the 1st Marine Division, and we assisted them to get out of their predicament. And we all then marched back to the American village of Wonsoon. What was it? I call it an American village. It was a North Korean village, but it was occupied by Americans. And we were debarked by ship. And I recall that on Christmas Eve, we boarded the ships in Wonsoon and sailed for South Korea, back to the port that I had originally landed in when I arrived in Korea. I forgot what.
It's not Wonsoon.
Wonsoon was North Korea.
Okay.
Busan, I think.
Anyway, I
Charles.
forgot the name of the port in South Korea. I don't remember what it was.
That's okay.
And from there, of course, we were loaded on trucks and transported back up to the north, to the 38th parallel, I think it was, where the fighting was going on. And there we were engaged the Chinese and the North Koreans again. The Chinese and the Koreans, they had a preference for attacking at night. They used to come in hordes, and they used to scream and try to put fear in us by screaming and so forth, and they had no regard for life. And in some of our defense points, when we woke up in the morning, the Chinese were laid out in front, or the North Koreans were laid out in the front of the lines, dead Chinese, Koreans, and they were stacked up like cordwood to get them out of the way, because they were in the way of the operation that was going on. I stayed in North Korea for 1 year with the 3rd Infantry Division, 7th Infantry Regiment. And then we were relieved and told that we were going back to the States. On my first day that we went into a reserve, I had some pains in my stomach, and I had to go to the medical clinic very early in the morning because I had very severe pains. And the clinic was not open, so I laid down by the front door, by the door to the clinic. And when they opened up, they took me in, examined me, and they told me that I had a serious case of appendicitis and it had to be operated on. So I went into the hospital, and the rest of the men that I was going back to the States with had left, and I had to stay back in the hospital until I was able to travel. Eventually, I made it back to the States alone, but I had lost all of my friends. Well, I guess that's all I can tell you about North Korea and South
Thank
Korea.
you, Charles. Charles had mentioned the port. The port was Port of Busan, sometimes spelled with a B for Busan. So just to interject that into there. And I do know we're getting close to our time, but if everybody would grant us a little bit of grace, I'd love to cover a part of Charles's service that doesn't often, I feel like, get highlighted too often, which is his service in the Cold War. So Charles, could you tell us a little bit about Operation Castle? What is that?
Operation Castle. What is that?
Operation Castle. That was the test area in the Eniwetok area, the Marshall Islands, and by that time I was in the Air Force. When I came back from Korea, I had enough of they wanted to send me to another infantry outfit, and I said no. And my enlistment was coming to an end in two or 3 months, and I said I'm getting out, and if I can find a job they had already a job for me, assigned me to some mountains or someplace anyway, to an infantry outfit. And I said, I'm getting out of the army, and if I can find a job here on the base, can I stay here until my enlistment comes up and until my enlistment comes to an end? So they agreed. This is the first time I've ever heard this in the army. I had only, I think, 3 months to go, and I found the first job, first sergeant's job, uh, Fort Fort Sam Houston at that time was well, it still is. It's a medical training. They have a large hospital there and a large medical training units. So I found a job as a first sergeant. I was a master sergeant at the time. I found a job as a first sergeant in a medical training company. And this is where I took my, a few months later, I took my discharge from the army.
And you went to the,
I thought, well, and I told my wife we would go back to Europe. But I thought before I do this, I had to secure my future. I said, and I went and joined the Air Force Reserve. And I was accepted in grade, and we went to Europe. And naturally, as I thought what would happen, I went broke, and I had to leave my wife there and go back to the States alone. So I left my wife there and reported to New York. What was the name of that Air Force base? Well, I
Andrews Base? Andrews Base?
No, I can't think of it at the moment. Anyway, I went into the Air Force, and I served in several different locations in the Air Force, and then eventually I was sent to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, at the Air Force Base there, and I joined a weather squadron as a medic that was going to be shipped to Eniwetok, to the Marshall Islands, and I was to accompany them as a medic. And by that time, as I told you before, I was a master sergeant. So we were transferred. We went to the Marshall Islands, and this was the testing of the first hydrogen bomb. And the weather squadron was always was there to keep just an eye on the weather and make sure that when the bomb was exploded, that they knew where the airwaves were going. They had to be careful that it did not go over any inhabited area and so forth. This was the reason for the Air Force Weather Squadron being there. That was their job. And of course, they had no medics, and I was assigned as a medic. But unfortunately, we got caught in a fallout. And at that particular time, the fallout consisted of small particles that looked like snow coming down. And we were tested with, now what do they call them? I don't know. Anyway, with machines that tested us for contamination. And the whole group that I was with, we were all infected with debris with the contamination of
Radioactivity?
radioactivity, yes. And they had no medical treatment for this condition. So the only thing that we were told to do, you go in the shower and you stay in there for 6 hours and scrub yourself down continually for 6 hours, and we hope that would take care of it. So that's what we did, and that's what happened. So I never had any ill effects. I don't think I did. I did have some problems once I got out of the service in Vienna. I was having problems with my lungs, but I did not associate with my incident in the Marshall Islands. So anyway, that's what's happened to me.
Well, thank you so much, Charles. Charles, I'd like to leave you with one final question, which is something you and I have talked about before, but do you have any words of advice for the future generations?
Oh, well, I've been asked this question so often before
Mhm.
that I don't know what to say because if another war comes, which would be very unfortunate, and the young men have to go and risk their lives or pay with their lives, I don't think they have any other choice but to do as they're told. But let us hope that they do not have to go, that there will never be another war like we experienced the Second World War, the Korean War. Of course, we have all of these small wars going on in the Far East and in Viet Cong and so forth. There have been wars going on and off for years. I don't think it will ever stop, but I don't know what kind of advice I can give them if they are drafted for participation in any war. All they can do is accept it and prepare themselves and try to do their best. This is all I can say.
Well, Charles, I want to thank you so much for your time this evening. Christophe, thank you so much for your insight and your input as such an amazing historian of Normandy and the whole region. You know so much. So I'm so grateful you shared that knowledge with us today. And I especially want to say a thank you to all of the guests who submitted questions for us. Charles got to as many of them as he could in the time we had today, but I wanted to thank you for your amazing questions. Again, thank you everybody. For everybody who's here in the United States with me, have a great afternoon. To all of our guests tuning in from France, I want to wish you a wonderful evening. And hopefully we'll be able to be together soon. Christophe, Charles, I hope that I can see you soon. And I also want to give a very special thank you to the lady behind the scenes today, which is our very good friend Marie, who's with Charles. So when you heard her speaking, that is our wonderful friend Marie. So Marie, thank you.
Welcome. We miss you, Laura.
I miss you too. I can't wait to see you all.
Incidentally, I'm living in France now. I have been here for 3 years.
Yes.
And I am very happy.
I am so happy. We love having an excuse to go visit you too. And just kind of as note, Christophe and Marie and I were talking, and Charles was the only Omaha Beach veteran at the Normandy ceremonies this year. And I believe, Christophe, there was one American veteran who was on Utah. Is that correct?
On Utah, from the 90th Division, the Tough Embrace, yeah.
Excellent. So hopefully next year for the D-Day anniversary, we'll all be able to.
We hope so, Laura. You have to come.
Yes, I hope to see you soon.
I hope to
see you soon.
Pandemic is getting less and less, and we hope that soon everything will have all free travel again.
We hope so too. My friends in France, good evening. Thank you again. Everybody, thank you again for joining us. We hope you'll be able to join us at a future program, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you,
Marie.
Christophe.
Bye.